A termination letter was sitting on the principal's desk when Owen Callard walked out of Ridgemont Elementary for the last time, carrying nothing except a worn canvas bag and a small paper crane his 9-year-old daughter had folded for him that morning, bright yellow, slightly lopsided, with a crayon smiley face drawn on one wing. Behind him, the vice principal muttered something about budget restructuring. A younger teacher looked away when Owen passed the staff room window. 31 years of combined teaching experience between the staff of that school, and not one person followed him outside. None of them knew the real reason he had stopped fighting back during that final meeting. None of them saw the 3 missed calls from the hospital that had lit up his phone under the table while the superintendent read out the decision. None of them knew that Owen's daughter, Maya, had been running a low fever for 4 days that he could not afford to get properly checked because the prescription coverage on his benefits had already been exhausted that calendar year. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for a long time. The heat from the September sun pressed through the windshield. He looked at the paper crane on the dashboard and thought about how Maya had woken up early to make it, standing on her stool at the kitchen counter, tongue between her teeth, concentrating with the kind of complete seriousness that only children have for small important things. She had handed it to him and said, "For good luck, Dad, in case they're being stupid." He had laughed, the first real laugh he'd had in weeks. Now he drove home through streets so familiar they barely registered anymore. The Tim Hortons on Dunmore, the shortcut behind the library, the turning where Claire used to point out the red maple tree every autumn like it was a personal friend. Claire had been gone for 2 years. Breast cancer, diagnosed late, moved fast. She was 39, Maya was 7 when it happened. Owen had spent those 2 years doing what widowed fathers do when there is no blueprint and no time to grieve properly. He woke up, he made lunches. He braided hair using YouTube tutorials, the laptop propped against the bathroom mirror. At 6 in the morning, both of them squinting at the screen together, he taught grade 4 science at Ridgemont. He attended every parent-teacher interview from the other side of the table now. He held Maya's hand at the Christmas concert because she was old enough to know her mother should have been there, and young enough that holding hands still helped. He had believed, in the way people need to believe things to keep moving, that hard work and patience would eventually stabilize things, that the school board would recognize what he built in that classroom over 12 years. That loyalty meant something. The budget cuts had come in June. The board had communicated through a consultant from Toronto, who spent 40 minutes explaining data about declining enrollment. Owen's position, specialist science teacher, grades 4 through 6, was deemed redundant. He had 30 days. He appealed. He gathered letters from parents, from former students, from the local science fair coordinator. He sat across from Diane Okafor, the newly appointed superintendent of Lakeview District Schools, twice. She was polite, she was precise. She wore the same expression both times, sympathetic, but sealed, like a door that appears to open but doesn't. The appeal failed on a Tuesday. By Friday he was done. What finally broke him was not the job itself. It was the evening of that Thursday, the night before his last appeal hearing, when Maya padded into the kitchen at 11 o'clock and found him sitting at the table surrounded by papers. She stood in the doorway in her socks. She looked at his face and then looked at the papers and then looked back at his face. "Dad," she said quietly, "are you going to be okay?" She was 9 years old. She was asking him. He told her yes. He told her to go back to bed. He waited until he heard her door close before he put his head down on the table. That question was the thing he could not stop hearing in the weeks after he left Ridgemont. His daughter was measuring her own security against his face every time he came home. She had already lost one parent. She was quietly, constantly watching to see if she was going to lose the other one too. Not to illness, but to whatever invisible weight seemed to be pressing him down. He resigned before the board could formally process his redundancy notice. The distinction mattered to him, though he couldn't have fully explained why. Maybe because a resignation was a choice, and he needed to leave something in his life that was still his. The weeks that followed had a strange, disorienting quality, like the silence after a very loud noise. He took contract work wherever he could find it. He helped a neighbor re-insulate a garage. He tutored high school students in Physics 6 on Tuesday and Thursday evenings in the library. He sold the good camera, the one he and Claire had bought for Maya's first Christmas, careful and quiet about it so Maya wouldn't notice. Money bought 2 months of groceries and replaced the winter boots she'd outgrown. But something else happened in those weeks that he hadn't expected. He started eating dinner at the table instead of standing over the sink. He was home when Maya came in from school, and he could see her face when she walked through the door. The slight lift in her expression when she found him there instead of a voicemail. They walked to the ravine on Saturdays and threw sticks in the creek. They made pasta together on Sundays, badly enthusiastically. He helped with homework without watching the clock. One evening Maya said entirely without preamble, "I like you being home." He said he liked it too. He meant it. But the money was going. Slowly, then faster. The severance was not large. The mortgage was not small. By October he was opening bills and setting them aside and opening them again later, a ritual of delay that solved nothing. He didn't tell anyone. He had been raised in the particular Canadian way of managing hardship privately, of not burdening others, of saying we're fine with enough conviction to make it temporarily true. His parents were in BC, his sister had 3 kids of her own, his friends from his teaching years were still inside the system he had left, and talking to them felt like reporting from a country where he no longer had citizenship. He managed, he was always managing. Managing was not the same as being okay. Diane Okafor did not think about Owen Callard for the first 2 weeks after he left. She was running a district of 11 schools through a difficult transition year. She had 3 schools under capacity review, a staffing shortage in French immersion, a capital budget that had been cut for the 2nd year in a row, and a board that communicated mostly through requests for data and expressions of concern about optics. She had taken the superintendent role 18 months earlier, and in that time, she had learned that being the youngest superintendent in the district's history meant that every decision she made would be audited more carefully, and forgiven less easily than anyone else's. She had been thorough and fair with the Owen Callard situation. The budget was the budget, the position was the position. She had followed the process precisely. Then the science fair happened. November, 3 of Ridgemont's grade 5 students Owen had taught the previous year, won first place at the regional science fair in Hamilton. Their project was a water filtration system made from materials sourced entirely from a municipal recycling depot. The research was meticulous, the presentation was confident. Judges noted in their written comments that the students demonstrated an unusually sophisticated understanding of both the methodology and the real-world application of their work. One of the students during the closing ceremony was asked by a reporter from the Hamilton Spectator where the project had started. The girl said, "Mr. Callard started teaching us to ask why things work the way they do, not just that they work. And then he told us the best science starts with a problem that actually matters to someone." The quote ran in the paper the next morning. Someone from the board office sent it to Diane as a news clip with no comment attached. She read it 3 times, she told herself it was a pleasant story, she filed it away. But something stayed loose in her thinking after that. She started noticing it in small ways, a comment in a staff meeting about declining science engagement in the junior grades, a report on student retention that showed a small but measurable dip in enthusiasm scores at Ridgemont post-restructuring, an email from a grade 4 parent that was politely worded and clearly the product of significant restraint. She had built her career on numbers, she believed in numbers. But she had also been a classroom teacher for 7 years before moving into administration, and she knew, with the part of her that administration sometimes tried to sand down, that numbers about children's engagement were always a delayed signal. You saw the dip in the data long after the thing that caused it had already happened. One Thursday evening, for reasons she did not fully examine, she looked up Owen Callard's file. There was nothing unusual in it. 12 years of solid performance reviews, 1 commendation from the district's curriculum team, no disciplinary record, a home address in a neighborhood she did not know well, east of the main road. She drove there on a Friday after 5 telling herself she was simply completing a professional courtesy. It was the kind of reasoning that sounded plausible right up until she turned onto his street. It was a quiet block of older houses, the kind with deep front porches and mature trees that had pushed the sidewalk slabs slightly askew over the decades. The houses were well kept but not new. The neighborhood had the look of a place where people had lived for a long time, which was different from the look of a place where people were doing well. Owen answered the door in a gray fleece and jeans, holding a mixing bowl with flour on the rim. Behind him, the kitchen light was on and the radio was playing softly, and a small person in wool socks was sitting at the kitchen table drawing something with absolute concentration. He looked at Diane with an expression that was neither hostile nor warm. Measured, he was clearly not entirely surprised to see her, which surprised her. "Mrs. Okafor," he said. "Mr. Callard, I'm sorry to arrive without calling. I wasn't certain you'd agree to speak with me." He considered that for a moment, and he stepped back from the door. Maya looked up from her drawing when Diane walked in. She had Owen's dark eyes and her mother's specific kind of stillness, not shyness, but a considered quality, a watching. She assessed Diane with a directness that children have before they learn to perform politeness. "Are you from Dad's old school?" she asked. I work for the school board, Diane said carefully. Maya thought about this. Oh, he was the best teacher there, she said, and returned to her drawing. Diane stood in the kitchen of that small warm house and felt something shift that she had not felt shift in a long time. She was good at not feeling things shift. It was, in many ways, professionally necessary, but the house was quiet in a particular way. The walls held photographs, a child's art, a hand-lettered quote in a frame above the window that said "Do not go where the path may lead." The flower on the bowl, the wool socks, the radio. This man had given 12 years to a system that had handed him a spreadsheet as a goodbye. She explained why she had come. Ridgemont was struggling with something she could only describe as a hollowness in the junior science program. The data was thin, but the signal was real. Oh, she had spoken to the current teacher, competent, well-meaning, and the teacher had told her, honestly, that she was managing rather than teaching, because the program had lost its architecture. It had a structure I inherited but didn't build, the teacher had said. I don't always know why certain things are ordered the way they are. Oss listened to all of this without expression. Then he said, I appreciate you coming. But the program was designed to be transferable. It should be fine with proper support. We let go of the person who built it, Diane said. He looked at her steadily. Yes, you did. There was a silence that was not entirely uncomfortable. The students at the regional fair last month, Diane said. The filtration project. Something moved in Owen's face, just briefly, a softening. Sophie Tremblay's team, they mentioned you in the press. He nodded, slowly. Sophie would do that, he said. She's meticulous about credit. Won't have anyone else's work attached to her name, won't have her name attached to anyone else's work. I used to tell her that was the mark of a real scientist. He paused. I heard they won. First in the region. He was quiet for a moment, and in that moment Diane saw something that the performance reviews and the budget documents had not prepared her for. He was proud, not of himself, of the girl. It was a completely different kind of pride, clean and undemanding, with nowhere left to put itself. She had met a lot of people in her career. She had met very few who looked like that. She told him she was prepared to offer him the position back, restructured, with a modified contract, flexible hours, a co-teaching arrangement she could fund through a provincial literacy and numeracy grant she'd secured in September. She told him the offer was serious and that she would not have driven across the city on a Friday evening if it were not. He was silent for long enough that she could hear Maya's crayon on paper. Then he said, I'm not going back to what it was. I'm not asking you to. My daughter comes first. Not as a phrase in a contract. As a fact, I understand. I don't think the board will agree to a modified. I'll manage the board, she said, and was faintly surprised to hear herself say it with that much certainty. He looked at her. Why? It was a fair question. She had been asking it herself in different forms, since November. Because I was wrong, she said. Not about the budget process. The process was sound, but I made a decision about what was essential and what was not, and I was working with incomplete information. I knew your output, I didn't know your value. She paused. Those are different things, and I should have known the difference. Owen's expression did not change immediately. He looked at her for a long moment, and she had the distinct sensation of being carefully read. Can I think about it? He said. It was not quite a question. She nodded. She picked up her bag. She thanked him for his time. Maya appeared from the kitchen doorway holding a piece of paper. She had drawn, in orange crayon, two figures standing outside a building that might have been a school. Above it she had written, in careful uneven letters, Good luck Dad's work. She held it out to Diane with the seriousness of someone delivering a formal document. You can have this, Maya said, because I already gave him the crane. Diane took it. She said thank you. She meant it in a way she hadn't expected to. She drove home through October streets with the orange crayon drawing on the passenger seat. Her apartment was quiet and clean and carefully arranged. The way spaces look when only one person lives in them and that person has learned to make order serve in place of warmth. She made tea she didn't drink. She stood at the window. She had been telling herself for 18 months that the job required a certain emotional distance, at proximity to difficulty clouded judgment, that she had learned this lesson once, early, and it had made her better at her work. Standing at that window she began to wonder if what she'd actually learned was how to be alone with herself and call it discipline. 3 days later Owen called. He said he had been thinking. He said Maya had asked him that morning why he seemed different, like something's deciding, she'd said, which was not the kind of thing you expected a 9-year-old to notice, but Maya noticed everything. He said he had realized that he'd been framing the question wrong, not whether to go back but whether anything would actually be different. So I have one condition, he said. Tell me. The modified hours are in writing, with teeth, not a gentleman's agreement. not subject to operational needs. If I have to leave at 3:15, I leave at 3:15. No meeting is more important than pickup. Done. A pause. That was fast. I had already drafted the clause, she said. I was waiting to see if you'd ask for it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said almost to himself, Claire would have liked you. She had no patience for people who took a long time to say what they meant. It was the first time he had mentioned his wife to her. She understood what it meant and did not try to turn it into anything. I'll send the contract draft Monday, she said. Okay, Owen. He waited. The drawing Maya gave me, I put it on my refrigerator. Another pause. And she could hear it, the particular quality of a real smile versus a polite one. He said, she'll be extremely pleased to hear that. What happened after Owen came back to Ridgemont in January is the kind of thing that doesn't make news but quietly restructures the air of a place. The junior science program ran its first Saturday family workshop in February, a morning of hands-on experiments in the gym, parents and kids side by side, not a worksheet in sight. 42 families showed up, which was 42 more than the vice principal had predicted. A father told Owen afterward that his son had talked about nothing else for a week beforehand, which the father describes honestly a bit of a miracle. The board noticed the regional fair results. They noticed the parent engagement metrics. They did not fully understand why things had shifted, because the thing that had shifted, the particular quality of attention that one teacher brings to a program they have built from love rather than obligation, does not appear cleanly in data. Diane understood it. She did not try to quantify it. She and Owen developed a professional relationship that was careful and honest, and occasionally difficult the way real things are. She pushed back when she disagreed with him. He told her when district decisions didn't make sense on the classroom level. They had 2 arguments in the first month, both productive. Once, after a long budget meeting ran into the evening, she stopped by the school and found him setting up for the next day's lab, and they sat on desks in the empty classroom and talked for an hour about nothing that was urgent and everything that mattered. He brought Maya to the school's spring science night in May. Maya wore a dress with birds on it and very serious shoes and asked every student presenter one genuinely good question. Diane watched from across the gym and thought about what it had taken for that particular evening to happen. All the grief and the stubbornness and the bad timing and the orange crayon drawing that was still on her refrigerator at home. She and Owen were careful with each other. They were careful the way people are when they have both had things taken from them and they have learned, at significant cost, that careful is not the same as closed. It started with a question, actually. Owen asked her once, on a walk they had somehow started taking on Sunday mornings, through the ravine near his house, Maya running ahead with a stick, whether she had ever wanted something she was afraid to want, in case wanting it made her less competent. It was a precise question. She answered it precisely. She said yes. She said she had spent 11 years building a version of herself that did not need anything she couldn't provide for herself, because needing had always felt, to her like a door someone else controlled. He said he understood that. He said he had spent 2 years after Claire died, trying to need as little as possible, because needing things meant you could lose them. And then Maya had asked him on a Thursday night if he was going to be okay, and he had realized that being unreachable was not actually protecting her. It was just making her watch him disappear from the inside. They walked for a while without saying anything after that. Maya came back down the path holding something, a stone, large and gray and almost perfectly round. For your desk, she said to Diane holding it out. Because you don't have enough stuff on yours. Diane had been in Maya's house exactly twice. She had never mentioned her desk. How do you know I don't have enough stuff on my desk? She asked. Maya shrugged. People who have enough stuff on their desk look different. Owen made a face that meant he had no explanation to offer. Diane took the stone. In June the district held its year-end recognition evening. Owen was not nominated for anything, which he didn't mind. What he minded, or rather what he noticed, was that the evening felt different from previous years. There were more classroom teachers on the speaking program. One of the agenda items was a new pilot for flexible scheduling across 3 schools, Ridgemont among them. Diane did not make a speech about it. She had learned, in the past months, that the things you are most quietly proud of are usually the ones you don't need to announce. After the event, Owen found her in the parking lot, which was largely empty by then, the evening warm and damp in the way that southern Ontario evenings are in late spring. Good night, he said. It was, she said. They stood there for a moment. The streetlights had come on. He said, I want to say something and I'm going to say it once and then let it be whatever it is. She looked at him. She did not move. I'm glad you showed up at my door in October. She considered this. I was not behaving with particular professional dignity that evening, she said. No, you were behaving like a person. He paused. I hadn't had a lot of that lately. The parking lot was quiet. Somewhere a few blocks over, a car turned and its headlight swept the sky for a moment before disappearing. I'm glad too, she said. For what it's worth. It was worth something. They both knew it. Maya, who had been in the back seat of Owen's car this entire time apparently reading, opened the door and stood up. Can we get food? She called across the parking lot. It's 9 o'clock, Owen called back. I know what time it is, she said. Diane laughed. It was a genuine, unguarded laugh, the kind she had not heard from herself in long enough that it sounded unfamiliar and then quickly didn't. Owen looked at her. There's a place on King Street, he said. Good poutine. Maya is very serious about it. I'm aware of how serious poutine is, Diane said. Are you coming or not? Maya called. Diane looked at the stone in her coat pocket. She had been carrying it since June, a habit she hadn't examined. She looked at Owen. She looked at Maya, standing in the warm evening light with her bird's pattern dress and her excellent shoes, holding the car door open with the practical patience of someone who already knows how the decision is going to go. Yes, Diane said. I'm coming. And she was. Before this story ends, think about the question Owen asked himself in that parking lot in October, the one none of the documents or processes or spreadsheets had ever asked him. Not what are you worth to the organization, but what does your life look like when you stop making yourself small enough to fit inside someone else's budget? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from today, and what you'd choose, a career that asks everything of you, or a life with room enough for the people who know what time it is. Share this story with someone who's been quietly carrying too much for too long. And subscribe to Resilience Tales for more stories about the kind of strength that doesn't make the news but changes everything anyway.